The floor is yours.
Well, Slava, thank you for a very kind introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here today. Some of you may be new to importing, some of you may not be so new to importing, but as you know, things change. And even though they do change, you've got to pay attention to the basics. And today we're going to give you an overview of importing into the United States. There will be future webinars. You may want to us to continue with importing, or you may want to address a topic like exporting. We'd love to hear from you, and we'll follow up with your suggestions. Now, right now, um, I'd like to introduce basically a topic of customs brokers. If you're going to import goods into the United States, chances are you don't have the software to communicate with customs, and you will, like 99% of importers, make use of a customs broker. These are people who are licensed by the US government, Department of Homeland Security. They take a test, and it has to do with commodity classification, also has to do with customs regulations and security. Right now, security is very much on the mind of customs officers everywhere. And that's really the primary mission of customs, is to protect the homeland. But customs officers also do something else. They do many things, as a matter of fact. They collect revenue, and they also enforce the regulations of other agencies. And we're going to talk about that. But customs brokers are an intermediary. They're between you, that is the trading community, and the US government. As I mentioned, they're licensed by the US government. They can also help a company to become a customs brokerage company. They're considered to be basically customs lawyers, at least in the administrative sense. And they can help you with questions you're going to have about your product. What is the commodity code? One of the things that you have to remember as an importer is that if there's any kind of violation of some kind of law or regulation, you're going to be on the receiving end of a penalty. If you're importing, you should set up a customs compliance program. But first, think about the customs brokers. If you have one, great. I hope the relationship goes well. Remember to talk to your customs broker, exchange information, your database regarding what you're bringing into the country. And I'm talking about the commodity codes, that is the harmonized tariff schedule of the United States. You and the broker should be in agreement as to what that commodity number is. And the customs brokers basically prepare tax forms, and they can guide you. Customs brokers are considered to be experts by the US government, and you should consult a customs broker, a licensed customs broker, before you bring your goods in to the US. Now, there's a lot of customs regulations out there. Some of them are mind-numbing, they're complex, and sometimes compliance is difficult, but the customs brokers can help you, and that's what they're there for. Talk to them before you bring your items in. Later on, I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can have more certainty for yourself, and it's called a binding ruling. You can actually go to US Customs for advice, written advice. They're going to prepare what's known as a binding ruling for your goods that are coming into the United States, and up to five items at a time can be considered by customs. And before you bring something in to the country, you want to be sure of the commodity number, you want to know about the rate of duty, and you want to know about marking requirements. Marking requirements are very, very important. And you also want to know whether or not your goods are going to be subject to quota, or they're going to be subject to other kinds of restrictions. So that's what you want to do before you bring the goods in. So I told you about the broker. They know about customs regulations. They can help talk to you about them. They transmit information to customs. There's really no more hard copies of anything. Everything is done electronically these days. And they have an obligation to you, and they have an obligation to the government. They're middlemen. The government doesn't tell them how much to charge to handle your entries. But when you're looking for a customs broker, look for a reputable one. Look for one that's been around for a while, and ask about what kind of software is being used. Ask about the people who are working in the company. What kind of expertise they have? How long have they been around? And is there somebody in that company who is familiar with the items that you're importing? That would be very nice. And before a custom house broker can do anything for you, you'll have to give the custom house broker a written document. It's called a power of attorney. And in writing, you have to authorize the customs broker to handle your business, to file information with the government, do other things. They shouldn't do anything for you until you have that power of attorney form filed with them. So Customs brokers, what else do they do? Well, I've mentioned that they transmit information to CBP, and it's all codes. It's hard to understand. And they make use of a computer system. It's called the Automated Commercial Environment, or ACE. And it took about 30 years to get this system in operation. And you've also got to be aware of things on the horizon. And you've got to also understand that laws do change, and you've got to understand your duties right now. When you're importing goods into the United States, you have to exercise something known as reasonable care. The government has never really defined what's reasonable, but I can tell you, if you make mistakes, you're going to get tagged. And the last thing you want to be is known to U.S. Customs, at least as a violator. So that's why you talk to your broker. And you're going to receive from Slava and from Carly a handout. And it's called reasonable care. There's all kinds of checklists. The things that you should consider before you bring your goods into the United States. But remember that back in 1994, the world changed for importers. Right now, you're the party responsible for classifying and putting a value on the goods you're bringing into the country. And you've got to do that. Customs has to inform you of the laws and regulations, and that's why you should go to the Customs website. And if you haven't been there, go there, www.cbp.gov. All right, so next slide. I'm going to be going through these quickly, but you will be receiving this PowerPoint. I'm going to speak, I'm going to highlight certain topics. You will have the ability to read, to know more about what I'm talking about at a later time, because Slava and Carly are going to be providing you with the PowerPoint and some guides, and you're also going to receive an electronic book, Importing into the United States. So reasonable care, informed compliance publication. Know that Customs at www.cbp.gov has a lot of these informed compliance publications. It's about every kind of importing topic that you can think about, and go there. You can educate yourself. The guides are actually written very well. They're in understandable language, and really they're very, very helpful. Not if you haven't been around before, this can help you. And even if you've been around, you've been importing for a while, there are things that you may have forgotten, and you've got to keep educating yourself if you're going to keep importing. So mentioned about the MOD Act, two things it had provided for: informed compliance. Customs has to put you on notice, and then you as the importer have to exercise reasonable care. Now remember too, you don't want to screw up, you don't want to foul up when it comes to importing goods. That's why you talk to your customs broker. There are some other experts that you can consult besides a broker. You can talk to a customs lawyer. They're out there, not many of them, but they are. And you can also talk to accountants who have experience in international trade. Customs considers these people to be experts and advises you to seek out information before you import goods, because if you do violate, you don't want to be on receiving end of a harsh penalty. And Customs looks at penalties based upon the kind of trouble that's been caused. Is simple negligence involved? That means that you were careless. There's an oversight. Gross negligence means that you really didn't care at all. You weren't really worried about the consequences. Fraud means that you've had the wrong kind of mindset. You're trying to trick, fool, put one over on the government, and there are big penalties for fraud. All right, so reasonable care, you'll have the checklist. Customs has never defined the term, but there's all kinds of checklists in that handout. And again, it's worthwhile going to that ICP, or Informed Compliance Program. Next topic is freight transportation. If you're going to be in importing, well, you have to know a little bit about transportation. How do items get around the world right now? Not too long ago, we were looking at the Suez Canal, a great big tanker caught in the Suez Canal, it wedged, at an angle. And 90 to 95% of all goods that are imported come in by way of ocean vessel. I used to be in the transportation business, as a matter of fact, with an NVOCC, non-vessel operating common carrier. But if you're going to be in the importing game, your customs broker can help you out. As a matter of fact, they spend a lot of their time worrying about transportation related needs and what they have to do for you. There's transportation besides ocean. There's also air freight, and again, your broker will know all about that. Same thing with truck. There's also barges, there's rail. And if you're using many different forms of transportation with your shipment, it's called intermodalism. And the thing for you to remember, if you're going to be having goods sent to you, make sure they're packaged correctly. and make sure that they can survive the journey by whatever mode of transportation that they're being carried. Also, make certain that you have insurance on the goods that are coming into the United States. If they come in damaged or if they're lost, you want to be able to collect. And you can talk to your customs broker about that. If you're going to be an importer, and you're going to do commercial imports, you're going to need something known as a customs bond. And customs bonds come in basically two different flavors. One is some known as a single entry bond, which means that the bond is good for one transaction. What you want to get, if you're going to be importing more than once, you want to get a continuous bond. And your customs broker can put you in touch with a surety company. The minimum amount for a bond is $50,000. That doesn't mean that you're going to be paying $50,000. You're going to have to pay premiums. It could come to $500 a year, $600 a year, but you'll be able to bring in commercial shipments 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And customs always has the ability to take a look at what you're bringing in and make a determination as to whether or not your customs bond is sufficient. Now, why is customs making it necessary for you, the importer, to have a bond? So you'll do the right thing. So you'll follow the regulations. So you'll follow procedures. That's why. And the government also wants to make sure that it gets paid. So if you don't pay the government can always go after your bond. That's the reason for it. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on importer security filings. Security is everything these days. And when it comes to importing foods, the government has all kinds of new regulations. Matter of fact, there's a very important law that you should know about, the Food Safety Modernization Act. But whatever is coming in, particularly if it's by ocean vessel, the government wants to know about it before it gets here within the customs territory of the US. And the customs territory, we're talking about the 50 states, we're talking about Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. They want to know what's coming in. They got an idea because they don't know if they're going to have to examine. And when it comes to examinations, yes, the offices conduct examinations at ports of entry. Did they do it the way they did it years ago? The answer is no. Your shipment, the container that you brought in, it's going to be examined at a warehouse. What you see on the screen right now, it's just an overview of the shipping process. But you have to remember, as a starting point, you've got to know about these things. You've got to talk to your exporter, the person supplying with goods, and make sure that the goods come into the United States properly. And they prepared the right kind of invoice for you. They package the goods a certain way so they can sustain. They can go with the type of travel, the type of transportation that the goods need to come into the United States. Then at the port of entry, and the U.S. Customs has about 230 ports of entry, the goods may or may not be examined. If you've never imported before, yes, you're almost guaranteed that there's going to be an examination. Why? Because you're unknown. And this is, again, almost a guarantee, 99%, 95% certainty that your goods are going to be looked at. You have to have the right kind of documents for importing. And the most important document that you, the importer, you need a commercial invoice that jives, that goes with the customs regulations. And an commercial import invoice is a lot different from a domestic invoice. You'll be able to look at the PowerPoint presentation. You'll also, if you don't know anything about bills of lading, you'll also need that. You're going to need documents to give to your customs broker so your customs broker can transmit information to customs. And remember that when you're giving information to anybody, documents, everything goes in writing, okay? If you're going to be transmitting information, you always do it in writing. Now, when it comes to commercial import invoice requirements, there's a lot here. If you're not familiar with the customs regulations, talk to your broker. Great big book, you can get it online. I recommend that if you're in an importing business, you get a hard copy of the regulations. Try to get a loose leaf version of the regulations. And you look at sections 141.83 through 141.86, a lot of things that you have to put on a commercial invoice. Commercial invoice is terribly important to you, and it's terribly important to customs, all right? It's all gonna go, all this information is gonna be transmitted to customs, and customs has a form. It's, again, everything's electronic. It's the customs form 7501. It's called an entry summary, but you need this information. And if it's not here, customs can detain your shipment, and that's not what you want. Detentions are costly, and you can also anger the people at the receiving end. They're not getting their goods in time, and they're going to blame you, the importer. Okay, what went wrong? What you see on the screen right now is an image of customs officers located at the port, and they're conducting an examination. Most examinations are not conducted outside anymore. It's usually within a certain location, a certain building. Why? Customs doesn't want people to know what they're doing. Every once in a while, customs comes across contraband, usually drugs, and they may do what's known as a controlled delivery. They will have officers follow up and see where the items are going. So when you're bringing goods in, chances are first time, yes, the goods are going to be examined. And the customs officers do quite a bit. And you'll find them at seaports, airports, any port of entry. There's 230 of them. You'll also find customs officers overseas. They have what's known as pre-clearance stations. You can find them in Canada, Ireland, a number of other countries, and you could be cleared customs-wise before you come into the U.S. They also have a lot in the way of immigration duties these days, and they have since 2003 when they became part of the Department of Homeland Security. Talked a little bit about entry before, what you need. You need the right kind of documentation. Thankfully, Slava and Carly have provided you with an informed compliance publication, and it's called Entry, and it's the nuts and bolts of what you need to know when it comes to submitting documentation or submitting information to your broker and to U.S. Customs and Border Protection. What do you have to do? So the customs entry process is laid out for you. If you're not familiar with the great big commodity book called the Harmonized Tariff Schedule of the United States, it can be scary. A lot of people are intimidated by this book. In hard copy, if you printed it out, it'd probably be 16 pounds. And the US government says that everything that's brought into the country can be classified pursuant to this great big book. So if you don't know much about classification, talk to your broker and then think about getting what's known as a binding ruling. So we also have these forms. I have them up on a screen. The 7501 is the most important document, the most important form to customs. It is an accounting document. All kinds of information is put on that form. Again, it's electronic these days, but information must be submitted to customs along with, again, you talk about duties, taxes, and fees. Entry summaries got to be submitted with payment for duties, and a duty is a tax on an import. Sometimes there are certain fees depending on what you're bringing in, and you got 10 working days, or if an importer elects, you can make payments basically through an account, and payments can be done on a monthly basis. So the entry summary's got a lot of information. You've got to provide this to your broker, who's then going to provide it to Customs and other agencies. Customs also works very closely with the Food and Drug Administration. As a matter of fact, U.S. Customs and Border Protection has agreements, enforces the laws and regulations of 47 other federal entities. Okay, so they've got a lot to do. There are all kinds of different types of entries. The most common one is what's known as an O1 entry. That's something that goes into commerce right away. That's about 98% of all these types of entries. Again, at your leisure, you can sit back, look at the slideshow, and you can look at additional information, the ICP publication entry, and find out more about the different types of entry. There's things known as inbound entries. That is, you're bringing the items from one port to another, and then their entry will be made, and you can read about that. American goods returned, the processes for bringing back American goods. And a lot of American goods go abroad. They're assembled or they're worked on, and then they're brought back into the country. So you'll know more about that. If you don't want the goods to go into commerce right away, they can be put in what's known as a customs bonded warehouse. And you can also put them in what's known as a foreign trade zone or free trade zone. And there's a lot of them around the port. There's a lot of free trade zones drive of the port, and again, you can read about them. Foreign trade zones. Remote location filing. If you find a broker, the broker should be, these days, should be able to bring your goods into any port. Okay, not all brokers have it, but basically most do right now. And at one time, brokers were found at a particular port, and people in that area would be dealing with that broker because that's where the goods came in at that port. Right now, the brokers have the ability to file your entries at any of the ports. So ask about remote location filing. I went over requirements before customs broker is going to be able to deal with you. You must give to the customs broker what's known as a customs power of attorney. And a lot of people get a little scared. They don't quite understand a POA, power of attorney. What does it permit the broker to do? You know, in brief, it permits the broker to do things for you, to handle your goods and to send information to customs through the automated commercial environment, the computer system. And there's all kinds of requirements for filling out a power of attorney form correctly. I mentioned customs bond before. If you're going to be an importer and bringing goods into the United States, you need to have a bond. And you can read about them, look at the slideshow, but there's a form that's used, a Customs Form 301, that's a single transaction bond. Again, what you want, if you're going to be bringing in more than one shipment, you want to get a continuous bond. And just realize that customs checks on the bonds to see whether or not they're sufficient, the amount that they represent. If the 50,000 is going to be good for you, customs has the ability to increase the bond amount. But again, you don't pay the full amount, you're going to be paying premiums. All right, so here we have an image of a customs officer looking at agricultural products coming into the United States. It looks like this officer is with the contraband team. And what is he looking for? Probably drugs. And the officers are quite good at interdicting. There's a lot of containers also coming in. The officers can't do everything. They can't physically examine every shipment that comes in, but they've got all kinds of technology these days. They use machines that have gamma rays, X-rays. They can insert cameras. There's all kinds of things that they know about the shipment, even before the shipment comes into the US. And if a shipment comes in, it's going to be looked at. These new technologies. And if the officer sees that something's not right, say in an ocean container, they will order that the container be put aside so the contents can be withdrawn. It's known as devanning. And the officers will go through the shipment to see what's what. So sometimes detentions can be a day, 2 days, sometimes 3 days. Around the holidays, things can get rough at the ports. You might not be able to get your shipment right away. What you don't need is, well, you don't need examinations. They're costly. I can recommend to you, maybe we'll do this another webinar, you become a member of Customs Trade Partnership Against Terrorism. It's a security program. It's also good marketing for your company. We'll talk about that. CBP examinations, they cost money. Is the money going to customs? No. The money is going to, not unless the office is on overtime, but the money is going to the warehouse operator. What you've got to do too when bringing goods in, again, it's going to be reflected on your invoice. Make sure you have the right value on the invoice. What is value? It's really pretty easy. It's the price paid or payable between the buyer and the seller. Yes, there may be additions and deductions and so on. You can read more about it in the slideshow, but that's up to you. That's a requirement for you, the importer. And you've got to classify and you've got to come to the right value. These are additional costs. What you're looking at the screen right now, these are logos of just some of the agencies, some of the departments that Customs enforces laws for. And we can see got OSHA, APHIS, we have the United States Department of Agriculture, all kinds of agencies. Customs is tasked with doing a lot. And Customs not only does imports, it also does exports. Exports, pretty wild. There's not a lot in the way of guidelines, what Customs has to do with looking at an outbound shipment. And the outbound shipments can take some time to look at. So be careful. Other federal agencies, I mentioned Customs has agreements, I think it's with 47 other agencies. And if you look at the screen, you'll just see some of them. You've got to worry about if you're bringing goods into the United States, are they subject to quota? That means, can you bring in just so much of an item? Not you, but is there a limit for everybody? And quite often that is, not as much as there used to be, but it's something known as an absolute quota. And if your item is subject to a quota, it may be subject to what's also known as a tariff rate quota, which means you can bring the item in, even though the government said we already have enough of this stuff here. But if you bring it in, you're going to be charged additional duties. And where do you find quotas on what kind of products? You find them on agricultural products. You find them on chocolates and pasta. These are just some of the products, some of the restrictions. There's also anti-dumping that you'll have to worry about. During the Trump administration, there was quite a bit in the news about Section 301, 232, 201. But anti-dumping is really a penalty action. The US government has looked at imports coming into the country and said, listen, these items have, well, they received assistance from people. Anti-dumping, it appears that companies overseas have gotten together, they're colluding, and they're lending support, and these goods are coming into the United States at what's known as less than fair market value. And why do we care about that? Because it hurts domestic producers here. So an extra tariff, an extra tax gets put on those items. Countervailing duties, they have to do with government support. The US government will conduct investigations, may come to the conclusion that, hey, the goods that are coming into the United States at less than fair market value, well, they received assistance. There was a foreign government lending support, and that's why the exporters were able to send the goods into the United States at less than fair market value. That, in a nutshell, is anti-dumping duty and countervailing duty. Another thing you have to worry about these days, I'm only going to speak a few more minutes, but it's intellectual property rights. Customs is going full blast when it comes to protecting companies' intellectual property rights. There's also a publication that you can look at, another informed compliance publication called Intellectual Property Rights. Be concerned about this. Many times goods come in, they're held up by customs for the reason that the logo, the image on, say, a piece of clothing doesn't belong to the importer. It can belong to, say, the Disney Corporation. The sweatshirt you're bringing in has got an image of Mickey Mouse. Well, did the Disney Corporation give you permission to bring that in? Do you have an agreement? The goods are going to be held up. The Disney Corporation is going to be contacted because they have registered with customs, and your item is going to be held up until you come to some kind of agreement with the Disney Corporation. If, say, the corporation wants to give you an agreement and wants to settle, and you have to pay a royalty fee. What do you have to do about getting this item into the country? Intellectual property rights. Sometimes if you bring in products, you're related. You're actually related to the people overseas. It could be by blood. It could be because of business connections. Maybe you're an officer. Maybe you're a director of that company overseas. Customs wants to make sure that the value you declare is the right value, that it hasn't been influenced by contact, by connections, by blood. So you have to declare that. And if you don't bring in goods and you don't do the right things in terms of submitting the right documents or having your broker transmit the information to customs, your goods can go into something known as general order. And has nothing to do with the military. It has to do with a warehouse or location that the government's going to put your goods in. The goods are going to be taken out of, let's say it comes in an ocean container. They'll be taken out if no entry had been made on the goods 15 calendar days from when the goods arrived in the US. And the failure to make a timely entry, again, it's going to go in a public warehouse and the government's going to have a lien on it. You're going to also get hit with big fees with regard to storage. The geo, a nightmare, headaches, big delays, all kinds of expenses. This is not what you want. So make certain that you know what you're importing and what kind of regulations you have to follow to get your goods in without problems. All right. Liquidation. Customs is going to look at your entry and it has a certain time period to do that. It has a file and it'll keep it open to see if you declared the right value, that you classified things correctly, are there any other problems? And customs will then close the file after 314 days. That's something called liquidation. And if you don't agree with what customs has done, you can file what's known as a protest. And we'll talk about that another time. But you disagree with customs and basically you're going to argue with customs where you're right and what customs is wrong. Customs, while it has this file open, may send you a notice that your value is wrong or that your classification is wrong. And we're changing the classification and you're going to pay more money. Well, you can argue with customs and customs is going to make a determination based on the information, the evidence that you put before it. Your broker can help you out with this. Quite often these things are done by customs lawyers. They're called protests. Record keeping, that's what the file cabinets will remind you of, record keeping. As an importer, thanks to the Customs Modernization Act, you have to keep records. You were put on an honor system back in 1994. You have to keep records. And if you don't cough up the records, you don't present the records to customs when officers ask, you're going to get hit with a penalty. How long do you have to keep records? 5 years from the entry or final warehouse withdrawal. But again, sometimes you have to keep records a little longer. And again, look at the slideshow and you'll see that sometimes there are special circumstances. You don't want customs auditing you. So that's why you should look at the entries that you're filing every year. Make sure that you have records to back up the transactions. You can show what's happened with every import. Why? Customs can audit you. And the last thing you want is a customs audit. Very nice people, but they'll stay with your company. When they come to visit, they usually stay a long time, and audits are going to cause you, the importer, a lot of aggravation and quite honestly, a lot of money. It's going to decrease your productivity. What you're looking at right now, you come into the airport, you come in anywhere into the United States, land border, what have you. this is a reminder that customs can detain you and your goods, or it can seize your goods. Seize is just another word for arrest, and your goods can be arrested. Even money can be arrested if you're bringing in more than $10,000 in what's known as currency, negotiable instruments. If you don't declare it, if you're asked by a customs officer and you fail to declare, the money can be taken from you, and then you have to file what's known as a petition. You have to make an argument as to why your money should be given back to you. This is not something that you want. And you'll be dealing with fines, penalties, and forfeitures. These are the customs penalty people. They're really paralegals. And if a penalty action is great enough, matters will be dealt with in Washington. Most times, however, the penalty actions are handled at the port level. And again, I recommend that before you go to CTPAT, become a member of that. If you're importing or exporting, it's a great way to market your company. It's something that you can put on your website, that you're a CTPAT member, that you belong to a security program with the Department of Homeland Security's U.S. Customs and Border Protection. Importers, exporters, take a look at it, go to the government website. And again, you can read about it. Also know that you can bring goods into the United States, many times free of duty, what's known as preferential rate of duty, if you're following the mandates, the requirements, these free trade agreements. And the United States has a number of free trade agreements. You can read about them, and what's known as special access programs, and here they are. So a lot of things come in free. You've got to have evidence where the goods are coming from, where they originate, but that's not a bad thing to bring in goods and receive duty-free treatment. Prior disclosure, if you're doing things wrong, if you're screwing up, you're supposed to declare to customs that you're doing so. It's called a prior disclosure. You're supposed to notify customs that you've been wrong. But before you make a prior disclosure, I advise that you seek out the services of an attorney. Why? Because prior disclosures can open up basically a Pandora's box, okay? So just something you think about. Number one problem for importers happens to be country of origin marking. The United States is different from most countries. It requires that goods coming into the United States be marked conspicuously and as legibly and indelibly and permanently as possible with the name of the country where the goods originate. And that means where they're manufactured, where they're produced, where they're harvested. This is the number one problem for importers, commercial importers. Failure to mark the item or mark the container, the box, the carton that the goods come in. Samples, be very careful when you bring samples in. You can bring them in, but there's a publication I want you to know about, an informed compliance publication. It's called Commercial Samples. Look at it. Demurrage, again, you don't want your goods sitting at a terminal. Why? Because you're going to get hit with some big fees. It's going to cost you a lot of money if you don't get your goods cleared, and that's what that's about. Marine insurance, make sure you have insurance on your goods. It's cheap. Okay, any kind. It's coming in by air, coming in by truck, whatever, have insurance on it. Make sure you're insuring at least for 110% of the value of the goods. There are other things you can do. I mentioned binding rulings, and you can read about it. You can get help from customs. Customs does something for free for you. Your broker should be able to help you out. Customs lawyer may. You can write to customs before you bring goods in. It's about a prospective importation or importations. You've never brought the item in before. You go to customs for help. They have these kings and queens of commodity classification and known as national import specialists, and they will help classify your goods, tell you the rate of duty. You can ask them about marketing requirements. You can ask them about all kinds of other things. But again, business people want certainty right before you bring the goods in. Then you should also know about duty drawback. That's a program. You get 99% of the duty paid on imported merchandise back to you if you follow a certain process. And a lot of companies don't do duty drawback. I don't know why. The money's there for you. You paid for it before. And if the goods are going to go out of the country, if they're going to be exported, could be unused, could involve something known as a manufacturing drawback, you can get your money back. Not a bad idea. This program has been around since the United States first began. Then we have financing options you have to know about. And Slava can talk about this. He's an expert in this area. Letters of credit, documentary collections, and bank guarantees. Talk to Slava about all this stuff. That's what the company is here for, Express Trade Capital. Again, very, very important financing options for importers, factoring. All right, I went on a little over. I apologize. If you have any questions for me, I'll try to answer them at this time. And I think I'm going to go back and forth at this point in time with Slava and Carly. Okay, any questions out there? Slava?
Sorry for this technical difficulty. I was just on the mute. Ken, thank you very much for all this information. It's very useful. I hope the audience find it useful as well. So I see we have one question is, what is the binding rule and why shouldn't import a Kier? I know we briefly went over it. If you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, thank you, Slava. And it's very important. And I do recommend that. The one thing that business people are always looking for is certainty. You don't want any surprises after your goods arrive here in the United States. You don't want to find out that they're subject to anti-dumping duties, or they're subject to countervailing duties, or that they're subject to quota. And in some cases, it may actually be, you may not be able to bring them in because you didn't get a permit. Now, as an importer, you don't need a license for yourself. What you need to have is a bond. And you need to ask certain questions before you bring in items into the United States. And this has to do with binding rulings. If you're familiar with the customs regulations, you can go to part 177 of the customs regulations. And if you submit your request in writing to customs, customs has specialists, and they will look at the goods that you're bringing into the United States. Customs will consider 5 items at a time. They should be related. You have to give certain information to customs with regard to the port of entry. And you have to indicate to customs in writing whether or not you've ever sought advice from a customs officer, or if the item has ever been looked at by a court of law, federal court, any other kind of court. Have you talked to customs about this before? That's got to be declared. And then what you've got to do is, besides provide magic language, you've got to indicate to customs what it is you're going to bring into the United States. You have to describe in detail the product, the item, or items that you're bringing in. And you can advise customs to go to a website, or they can maybe include a catalog with your request. You can provide as much information as you can about the item. And if customs is not satisfied with what you've provided, customs will come back to you and ask for additional information. When customs gets the additional information, it was, prior to COVID-19, getting rulings or determinations back to you, the prospective importer, about the item, about its customs classification number, about the rate of duty. Is it going to be free? It's coming in under a special program. Is going to be an ad valorem, that's a duty based upon percentage. Is there going to be a specific duty to it? That's duty based on pound or quantity, or something known as a compound rate of duty, where it's percentage plus a specific rate of duty. Customs will address all these issues, and you can ask questions like, how should the goods be marked? And when you're explaining what the item is, also indicate to customs, and it may sound silly, it may sound rather obvious, but advise customs what the item is actually going to be used for. And you should be getting back, if you're submitting electronically to customs, probably now 6 weeks, to get word back, sometimes sooner, but you'll get a ruling, and that's good to have. You get a ruling, at least you have certainty with regard to what you're doing. Give the ruling to your customs broker. And chances are your goods are probably not going to be examined because customs considers you to be a responsible importer. You're exercising what's known as reasonable care. You actually took the time out to write to customs before you brought the items in. Customs has a very good idea now of who you are and what you're bringing in. So if you can cut down on the number of examinations, that's great. Examinations are costly, and most times they're really aggravating. Okay, any other question out there?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, there are a couple more questions.
Sure.
Actually, quite a few questions. I hope we have enough time. So one of them is coming from Acer, who's asking, how do you view the value of CBP web and outreach programs posted on their website?
Well, how would I'm sorry, I missed that question. Slava, what was that again?
How do you view the value of CBP web and outreach programs posted on the site?
Yeah, they've had them recently. I mean, sometimes it all depends on the presenter, who's presenting. Honestly, I think overall, Customs has done a very good job. Congress, I believe, has told Customs lately to pay more attention to trade. Those of you who are importing have probably been importing for a while, probably realize that Customs has changed over the years, and it has. You now have centers of excellence. If you can get to know an import specialist, that's great. They can provide you with a lot of helpful information. But remember that anytime you're dealing with Customs, anything that's said to you orally Anything that's not in writing is not binding upon the agency. So whenever you're dealing with customs, get something in writing. I think overall customs does a really good job with its website, its presentations. However, more can always be done. But I can recommend to you that you learn the basics and you go to the website and you download the informed compliance publications that you need. And the other thing you can do is make use of binding rulings, okay? Written determinations, very important. And try to establish some kind of rapport with a customs officer. Again, chances are you're not going to be importing everything under the sun. You're going to have a limited number of items you're bringing in. Get to know some of the people who handle that. But realize too, when you receive information from the government, if it's presented to you in an oral fashion, it's not binding on the government. And what you have to do is just educate yourself. International trade changes all the time. Customs, I think, has gotten a lot better over the years, providing a lot more information, and it's kept a lot of people out of trouble.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Yeah, our next question comes from Helen, who's asking, how does multimodal bills of lading impact LC transactions? And why would some importers, how do multimodal bills of lading impact LC transactions? And why would some importers do not allow multimodal bills of lading when they issue LCs?
Well, that's something we can talk about. And again, we can have an entire webinar on bills of lading. Bills of lading is, do a number of things. They're evidence that there's a contract for transportation of items. They also express what is being brought into the country, and they provide a lot of valuable information. Sometimes bills of lading are negotiable, others are non-negotiable. Sometimes some importers want to put a number of containers on one bill of lading. This presents problems for them. Say they bring in 14 containers at one time. If they put it on a bill of lading and an entry is made that way, showing 14 containers, if it comes to an examination, not just one container is going to be looked at, it's going to be the 13 other containers as well. What I have to say about intermodal, I could go on about this, but a very important part of bringing goods into the country is not just the documentation, and there's some publications you can read about that, but also packaging. If you're going to be bringing your goods by intermodal transport, take into account every avenue, every means of transportation, and ask yourself, are these goods going to be damaged when they're brought into the United States? That is, if you're bringing them in by way of ocean container, quite often the packages, whatever you're bringing in, are soaked, and that's because there's something called container rain. Make sure that the goods are packaged properly. What I would do is, and you're getting back to transportation documentation, sit down with your freight forwarder, and you know that, or you should know that when it comes to ocean transportation, it's regulated by the Federal Maritime Commission. But sit down with your freight forwarder, and you can brainstorm. Ask what I should do in this case. Again, everything is fact dependent. I know a lot of people hate to say that, but it is so. If you're talking about how should I do something, it all depends on the facts involving your particular situation. All right, anything else?
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of strict guidelines, so you should definitely get help of professionals in the industry.
Yeah, there's a lot to it, but fortunately there's some places you can go for information. And it's not just the customs website. I mentioned www.cbp.gov. There are other, think about any agency you're dealing with. If you're bringing in food products, you're bringing cosmetics. If they're subject to the FDA, you can go to the FDA's website and you can find out. But always keep a line of communication open with your customs broker, and always think about getting a binding ruling. You want to know as much about your item before it arrives in the United States as possible. That way you prevent problems. Once an item is here and you don't have the right kind of paperwork, or something goes wrong, you may have to, in some cases, if it involves food, you may have to destroy the food or have it re-exported. And again, when it comes to detentions, you don't want that. It's aggravating. You want to cut down on the number of examinations as possible. Therefore, you have to ask questions. And don't be afraid to reach out. And the same thing with the export side of the house. Don't be afraid to ask questions. There's no such thing as a bad question. But you've got to know who, what, when, where, how, and why. You have to know what your items are subject to, what kind of regulations. Again, customs has jurisdiction over everything that comes into the country. But other agencies have a say too. and that's usually the FDA when it comes to most imports. But sometimes the goods can be subject to regulations of the United States Department of Agriculture, or the Consumer Product Safety Division, or the Environmental Protection Agency. This, the Department of Transportation, it's all kinds of agencies. So you have to know as much as possible about the item before you bring it into the country. And if you're really not sure of your item, seek help. And that could involve getting a hold of an engineer, a scientist. You may want to make use of a laboratory to find out about the true nature of the items that you're bringing in. And make sure that you don't bring in counterfeit goods. There's a lot of counterfeit goods coming in right now. It's happening because, well, economies have been hit hard all over. And when economies are hit hard, counterfeiters have a field day. And it's a lot of phony stuff coming in. And I've also reminded you, think about intellectual property rights. Even if the goods are okay, they may belong to somebody else, at least the image on whatever you bring in. I'm also talking about copyrights. We're talking about trademarks, can affect patents. You have to know this stuff. Yes, there's a bona fide sale, but you don't own the intellectual property rights. That's something that an importer does not want to hear. So you got homework to do before you bring the item in.
Got it. Okay, thank you for that. Next question is coming from Dina. She's asking is, what is the number one problem for commercial importers?
The number one problem, as I had indicated, is marking, country of origin marking. Now, customs is a little, well, it enforces marking requirements that people from other countries find strange. Because of the Tariff Act of 1930, there are marking requirements with regard to the goods that come into the United States. People like to discriminate against certain goods if they're made in a certain country. And there's a requirement that goods have to be marked legibly, conspicuously, and permanently. At least, so the ultimate consumer, the party buying the goods, knows where they're from. And it's got to be marked in English. And quite often goods that come into the United States are not marked properly. And this can cause a lot of problems. You can also wind up with a marking penalty. And it's something that nobody wants. So if you have questions about marking, put it in a binding ruling request. Again, ask your customs broker as well. What do I need to do? Also know that other agencies have marking requirements, not just customs. All depends on the item.
Great. And I think I just have a quick question. So if importers are looking to seek help, right? Because you keep saying that they should seek help from professionals or from the agencies that would be able to guide them. What is the best way to go about it? Where would you go to find the information? Who do you reach out to?
Well, you can reach out to customs, but customs will comment. They'll advise with regard to their own laws and regulations. Sometimes if you're importing things like food items, you really need to know what you're bringing into the country. The FDA is got a lot of regulations, and a lot of the FDA regulations are very complex. And you should be seeking information or help from people who know about whatever it is that you're bringing into the country. Food items right now are under a lot of scrutiny, and they will be forever. It's one of those areas that the government is never going to let up on examining. They want to know all about the product that's coming into the United States. So you need to seek out people who know something about the FDA regulations. They need to know about the quality of the product that you're bringing in. If you're bringing in something related to food, the nutrition labeling has to be correct. The FDA labeling requirements, it's a big deal. And there are various groups out there that can provide you with certain help, but you may also want to make use of people who are knowledgeable about science, food science in particular, and laboratories, and how to stay out of trouble. What you need to do before you bring the item into the US, because quite often after you bring it in and there's a problem, a lot of times it can't be corrected. And then the importers either have to destroy or re-export the item right away. So, I mean, just off note, I work with a group right now, a couple of food scientists. One of them has been a professor with Rutgers University, my alma mater, Food Science Center, and he also works with, his name is Dr. Blumenthal. We have another doctor involved, Dr. Carrick. And then I work with a couple of customs attorneys, and quite a, one of them in particular, his background, a large part of it is food, FDA related items. And again, I was an import specialist. I did food. I was on a food team with customs. And then quite often, a lot of problems that importers can find that are not related to the government. Quite often it's packaging. Okay, you've got to make certain that your goods are packaged a certain way that they don't contaminate it, they don't poison the food. And you've got to also think about marketing, design when it comes to presenting your products to an American public. You may have a wonderful product, but you may have a lousy package design for whatever it is you're bringing in. Lousy design, lousy labeling. So you've got to address that, because what do you want to do? You want to make money, you want to sell, and you've got to think about these things.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, makes sense. I think we don't have any more questions in the pipeline. That I find it very useful. I hope everybody found it just as entertaining and useful as well. Unless you have anything to add, Ken, this was a great presentation. I'd like to say thank you very much, and for all the attendees as well.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening to me. I certainly appreciate you being in the audience. And if Slava and Carly are going to be able to present you not only with the informed compliance publications, but they're going to provide you with a book, and it's called Importing into the United States. It's an electronic book, and it's been written by Customs. You'll find it very helpful. Okay, if you want an overview of importing, it's a good book to have. And again, hope to see you again in other webinars. If you have any questions, if you want us to address any issues, Slava, of course, is going to address. Big part of importing is payment and documentation, etc. And he and his company know all about that.
Yeah. So yeah, and we certainly will send you all the information to all the attendees in regards to the importing and all the regulations and the guidelines later on today. So again, thank you very much, and keep your eyes open for any future webinars we have on different topics. We will have something coming up on the financing options we have available, and what actual Express Free Capital can provide for you. So we're very much looking forward to that. So for now, thank you very much. Let's wrap it up. And again, appreciate it.
Again, thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye now.